Okay, so we're live. Hi, everyone. I'm just getting us to go live on Instagram. So if y'all would just hang tight. It's being weird on Insta. There it goes. It's capturing it now. Look at that. Ooh, you look very good on Instagram, Payam.
That's good.
We're sorry we're late. You all know why we're late already, right? Because technology was giving us a bugger of a time. So we had some sound issues that we had to fix for y'all. So if you stuck around, we're really glad you're here. And I just want to introduce Payam and say a little bit about why I wanted to have him on, and then he's going to lead us in a prayer. I'm going to speak for a few minutes, Payam. So you just like
Please speak away. Please speak away.
I want to tell a story because I think this is so far afield for Sidewalk Talk listeners, what we're getting ready to talk about. So I need to like wrap a little bow around this for everyone. I had my first psychedelic assisted therapy session last year, and it put me so deeply in touch with my heart, and it put me so deeply in touch with what I will call this transcendent self that to me is so endemic to what Sidewalk Talk is all about. That I have had so many experiences of listening on the sidewalk, and when I get it right and I drop into my heart and I let go of my ego, I let go of trying to help anyone, and I truly want to hold space, I almost have a psychedelic experience listening on the sidewalk. And so that's why I wanted to invite you here. And I don't know where we're going to go. I know we talked ahead of time about this, but I'm okay with us having a good time and just talking. And for those of you that are listening in or right now live, I know on Instagram we can't see your questions, but if you're on LinkedIn, if you're on Facebook, or if you're on YouTube, you can actually put questions in the chat. Okay. So I want to introduce you to Payam. And he actually does medicine ceremony, but he's got some training in some other stuff in IFS, internal family systems, which is dear to me, and in somatic, experiencing a large portion of my psychotherapy practice. I didn't change at all until I worked somatically. Nothing worked for me. And so that gives you this really unique skill set of the spiritual, the ethnogenic, the internal family systems, and the somatic. So I'm really excited to get to know you more and learn more. And I know you're going to guide us in a prayer. So I'm going to shut up now. And I'm going to hand the mic over to you.
You said, I don't know how this is going to go on my invitation before you even say the prayers. Invite the unexpected, open the heart, and allow what needs to arrive as it will, and let love guide us.
Yes. Yes, please. All of that, please. Bring it.
All right. All right. Okay. Say a quick prayer and then we can get started, okay? Beloved Mother Earth, Grandmother Moon, Father Sun, Sacred Spirit, Spirit of Otak, the Spirit of Aya, the Spirit of the fungi, the Spirit of the heart, Spirit of our ancestors, our teachers in body and out, Ramdas, Bear Spirit, the Spirit of the wolves, the medicine gatherers, the medicine carriers, the medicine makers, the wisdom keepers, the Lakota, the Chumash, my spirit warriors, my spirit brothers and my spirit sisters, I thank you. I honor you. Thank you for nourishing our bodies, our minds, and our spirits with your abundance, your sustenance, and your medicines. Thank you for the love. Thank you for the pain. Thank you for the darkness and the light. Thank you for bringing us together in the quest of healing, of knowledge and of wisdom, of sharing, of getting to know, and of expanding. May we meet each other from a place of an open heart, an open mind, an open body, so we can be in truth, so we can get closer to healing, so we can go lightly on this earth as a manifestation of love and healing, and expand that outwards to all the people we encounter every day henceforth. Aho.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. I'm listening to my heart to see if there's a question, so I'm just going to go there. Yeah. I feel very tender saying this. I feel like we're in a bit of a hard spot right now. I don't know, because I haven't been in other spots. I've only been alive 52 years, so I know I'm not special in hard spots, but it feels like the world feels like it's in a hard spot. And I find the timing of psychedelics re-emerging in a more potent way in our culture to be interesting and a little bit magical. And this is going to be a big question, so don't feel any pressure. But what's unique about what psychedelics could offer us all in this hard spot, do you think?
It's funny you asked this question, because this was going to be my prayer at the very end. And it's funny.
I mean, we can just riff on it.
No. Let's go. I preface things, and it's like a ceremony that we're in. Sometimes we begin at the end and end at the beginning. Things are not linear. When we stop to think in a linear fashion, in a materialistic, dualistic way, that's the beginning of our healing. I think what's beautiful
Can you
about...
slow down? That was so important what you just said.
Sure.
When we let go of thinking in this linear, dualistic way, that's the beginning of our healing. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay, I just needed to repeat that. It was really, before we moved on, it was so important. I had to grab it. Okay.
Okay, grab it. You got it?
I got it. Thank you.
Sure. I think ultimately all dis-ease comes from disconnection from essential self, not the capital self, but the self with all capitals, God self, Jesus consciousness, or Buddha consciousness. I would go to as far as saying the consciousness of Mother Earth. And as you know, a lot of the personality disorders and traumas are really rooted in attachment trauma. On this plane, in this timeline. And the psychic structure of people is really interesting to me. How certain psychic structures become galvanized because of the polarity of parts that rise up as a result of severe childhood trauma, neglect, attachment trauma, and sacred medicines have a profound way for some to dismantle these constructs that we have made around ourselves to protect this organism, the mind of this organism. And these medicines come from Mother Earth and the wisdom of Mother Earth. And everything that I say in this answer carries a lot of weight, the words of themselves, and that can be split apart and continued in a longer conversation. But these medicines help us heal and become whole, ideally, if it's carried properly. if it's administered properly. It's administered by the right medicine carrier. If the medicine carrier can recognize the right medicine for the right person who's coming in the seeking of their healing.
Mm.
So it's a multifaceted answer. There's a lot of breadth and depth to this question, and so I'm touching on it very lightly.
Yeah, I had a little bing. So I'm really hearing what you're saying around this, that medicine, let's see if I can get to the essence of what it means in me, what I heard you say. I'm hearing you say that there's a fundamental disconnection, not only to ourselves, but to the earth. And we defend around that disconnection. Identity is one of the ways that we defend. And that medicine becomes, in a way, I heard it as a gift from the earth to heal. Yeah.
It's been a gift all along. We just forgot.
Yeah. Why did we forget? That's what's so curious to me. Why did we need to or maybe we were doing it in other ways. I mean, I think people meditate and are able to do it through meditation and breath work.
Well, I think a lot of the reasons why we forgot is because scientific reductionism, first religion and then scientific reductionism, came to abolish our connection from God's spirit.
Mm.
And it's been so entrenched into our psyche that we can't conceive of another paradigm outside of the paradigm in which we are. And these sacred medicines allow us to break free of the jail of the mind that we're in, to extricate ourselves from the mind, as famously stated by Ram Dass, one of my spiritual teachers, right? To extricate out of body, out of mind, out of timeline, out of space, and to be able to witness oneself through different layers of consciousness. Now, what I'm saying is, needs to be prefaced by saying that this is for people who have a deep relationship with psychedelics and the spirit world. And what I'm saying is not necessarily, if at all, the experience that people who are beginning to embark on this journey will have. Again, depending on which medicines are being worked with and what context, dosage protocol, duration, and so forth. And their personality structure, their history of trauma, their biological history, their structural history, and the history of the mind, and so forth.
Yeah. Well, you talked about identity, and then you also talked about disconnection. And, Sidewalk Talk is all about connection, right? How could psychedelics, we've got so much conflict going on. We're polarizing all over the place right now. And I can imagine my answer to this question after doing a psychedelic journey, but you've done so many ceremonies with people. What's your perspective on how psychedelics could help us reconnect with each other, even when we seem to have so much tension, conflict, differing needs with each other?
Before we begin by addressing connection with others, we have to address connection with ourselves. Identities are constructs. They don't mean anything. They only mean anything or something in as much as you give that meaning. And once you're connected to your essential self or your spirit or your soul, when you're bodiless and mindless, you realize that there is nothingness, and in nothingness there's everythingness. And everythingness encompasses everything else in that everythingness, you see? And so once we start to learn to disidentify with the identifications we've taken on, that's the beginning journey of connecting with our essential and true self.
Oh, okay. I think I got something. So what I hear you saying is that actually we get so identified with our identity and ourself that we protect that so much that we can't connect anymore, and that the true connection with self is getting a layer below that identity. Is that what you're, am I hearing you right? I want to make sure I'm getting it right.
In a way, Ram Dass
Well,
said,
adjust me. Where did I get it wrong?
sure. No, you didn't get it wrong. I mean, again, we could look at it and address it in many, many different layers. So, Ram Dass said, he came into this world, he incarnated, and he entered into somebodyness training as a Jew, then a professor, and all this. He got into somebodyness training. And our somebodyness training is oftentimes conducted by people that are carrying a lot of trauma. And their trauma has made them somebodyness, right? So they've carried the trauma, not realizing and what those traumas or how those traumas could have impacted their children, their kin, their family, their culture, their society. You see, so everyone's in somebodyness training, and then they leave their body, and then they incarnate again and back into somebodyness training. So these cycles don't get broken. So Ram Dass, let me finish, because this is just the beginning of it. So Ram Dass, once he had the aha moment, he went and took a whole bunch of medicine, and then he looked at himself and was like, oh, there's no legs, and there's no me, and I don't actually exist. So that's when the beginning of his nobodyness training, of disidentifying with all the things that he thought he was, and that was the beginning of his spiritual path. And so once we realize that we're actually nobody, and all these things that we wear are parts of our identifications. Right now, I'm talking to you as Payam, the facilitator, medicine carrier, man, 46 years old. And on another layer, I can talk to you as a human being. On another layer, I can talk to you as an energy being. And another layer, I can talk to you somatically or psychically. No, on another layer, there is no you and there's no me. And we're together and everything is one. So it's kind of looking at what layer we exist in, and to what degree we attach to those layers, and to what degree within those layers do we conduct ourselves as separate from other.
I just got a kick out of the somebodyness training.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really profound what you're saying, and for me, I got a little excitable because, again, another click. I'm like, again, I also like really regular words like that rather than the elite kind of psychobabble words. Somebodyness training is just so my jam. But the somebodyness training we get often comes from somebody who is carrying their own trauma. So that trauma isn't just getting epigenetically passed down in our DNA.
Yeah.
We're being socialized in the training that we get. Yeah.
I mean, that's a G-rated version of saying it, but yeah.
Oh, you mean there'd be curse words and things in there or something like
that?
No,
that's a digestible way of saying things without getting too esoteric about it.
Sure. I like that though. I like it to reach every person for sure. Well, I remember the first time somebody mentioned psychedelics when I was in graduate school to be a therapist 20 some years ago. I was like, aside from the hippies, I didn't know that people were doing, this was before maps and people were actually, before it was more sanctioned. It was really wild and underground. But I remember I went into a therapist's office curious about it, and she said, oh, don't do that. You're going to like break your head or something. You're going to go crazy. And I do think people still tell those stories to themselves. And I'm imagining when you meet someone that has a story like that, that informs you of something. Like, what do you do with that? How do you make sense of that with somebody that tells you that? Or because sometimes I think that's just their intuitive guidance. That it's not what they should be doing at that moment, or is it?
Well, those people don't come to me.
They want to get their heads broken.
People who come to me understand what I do, and they've heard about me through the network of people that are in the community. So they understand the nature of my work and what I'm here to do.
Mm-hmm.
And when I speak with therapists who sometimes refer their clients to me, their patients, their clients, and so forth, they have a really good understanding. And the people that come to me have reached the boundaries of the traditional methodologies that have failed them, essentially. And then they seek out working with psychedelics to break through these barriers that are oftentimes constructed by the protectors of the mind, or the protectors in the bodies, the structural, emotional protectors, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
but to answer your question, again, there's many different medicines that are available. I mean, in Africa alone, there's 3,000 plant medicines that are used ceremonially, historically. We hear of MDMA, psilocybin, ketamine, some other substances, because these are more on the forefront of research and so forth. There's a lot of different medicines. All these medicines carry a particular signature. They have their own history. They have their own cultural relevance and context. I'd say that depending on the psychic structure of people, certain medicines shouldn't be worked with, if at all. Certain medicines can certainly splinter part of the psyche, and people can come back and never recover from psychosis. I won't disagree with that. So long as the personality structure and the psychic structure has the bandwidth and has the malleability, we talk about window of tolerance. There's also a window of tolerance in the mind where parts are not so polarized and so divided that they jump from one to the other, as in, DID and BPD, DID, so forth. Where
It's borderline personality disorder and dissociative identity disorder for those of you that aren't therapists listening.
yeah.
Yeah.
So we have and there is no self or essential self or the witness to be able to extricate and be able to be in relationship. So you have parts that are constantly skipping
Mm-hmm.
like a Rolodex, and for those, these medicines could be somewhat dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay.
Or they could go into spiritual bypass, and we could talk about the structural parts of the mind and how they operate in medicine and so forth. But
Oh, I love that you just brought that up, because that's the other thing that someone said to me is, "Oh, you just are a liberal that wants to like float around on a cloud by taking drugs." And spiritual bypass away that there's oppression and bad stuff happening in the world. How do you distinguish between this essential nature work, this essential self work versus spiritual bypassing? I love that you just brought that up.
well, I'll get a little. I'll speak in the way a therapist may speak. So that's the best way I can explain some of these things, and then you can break it down if you want to for the audience that may not necessarily understand, right? So when we're talking about NPD, for instance,
Narcissistic personality
personality,
disorder.
so that there's grandiose and vulnerable. The grandiose don't have a problem, and they very rarely, if ever, show up to ceremony, at least for me. Whereas the vulnerable, they're the victim of life. And vulnerable NPD is fascinating because you have the idiopathic pain, for instance. I deal with a lot of people who have idiopathic pain or structural pain. And the interesting balance of how certain real symptoms support the belief of the NPD, in this case, vulnerable NPD. I'll just refer to it as an NPD client. How the real structural, the idiopathic supports the belief of the vulnerable narcissist. That gets amplified. And in my experience, there are a lot of vulnerable parts that become very engorged in the psyche of the person and subsumes or suppresses the essential self as the witness.
Okay.
You're with me so far?
Yeah, but what does idiopathic mean?
Idiopathic pain that there's no structural relationship with this pain. It's a mystery pain, essentially.
Ah, got it. Okay.
Psychosomatic, idiopathic,
Got it.
invisible pain.
Okay.
With me so far?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got the vulnerable parts that are very much identified with and become the superstructure of the psyche, and not only put the self in the foundation, but they bury it underneath the foundation. So everyone pretty much has a self or an essential self, but to which degree is how much these personality structures become amplified and suppress the self, right? So, for instance, if you're working with the spirit medicines, these medicines can't get through these amplified, identified, vulnerable parts. In fact, they even amplify more and engorge them more in medicine. And depending on dosage, the medicine turns off the default mode network, the thinking self, right here, right, the DMN. And then you go into this unified, I'm everything and I'm God. But because this structure of identity becomes so inflamed that all these other parts that can be worked with in medicine get drowned out.
You mean the
And
God complex takes over, and then the other
yeah,
parts you can't work with?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, they go bye-bye. And hence spiritual bypass. And a lot of people, so there was a long drawn answer to this question. So you get bypassed.
Helpful though. That's so helpful though. I don't think a lot of people talk about this. That you could get really almost addicted to that God complex and do psychedelics just to do that sometimes.
Yeah. So those are the people who sort of chase these peak experiences. Now, what I'm saying is, in the positive experience of psychedelics with people with NPD, BPD, and NPD and BPD, basically, some can also have absolutely horrific experiences because these medicines start to dislodge their identity. They start to shake the superstructure of identity in a way where these parts get some idea that they're not who they thought they were. And they desperately try to cling on and not lose. And then they go into absolute panic and go into a bad trip. Hence, you see, so hence my caution about who facilitates this medicine, who understands the things that I'm talking about, who understands their medicines, and who works with these medicines respectfully in offering it to people that can hold this medicine in their body and in their psyche.
I'm going to offer something to the listeners, just a quick primer on BPD is borderline personality disorder. I was lucky to have a mother with BPD. It's no secret why I'm a therapist. Although, most, I think, now think BPD is complex trauma and with a lot of dissociative stuff built in. But basically, the person doesn't have a lot of an observing ego. So they're moving more and more from reactivity in child states. And they don't have a lot of observing ego or essential self that's choosing how they respond. And their primary defense is they split. So when they're in a relationship, one person's good and one person's bad. Our culture is in a collective state of BPD right now. I mean, I'm telling you, we're like splitting the world into good people and bad people left and right, which is probably why it's so triggering to me, because it reminds me of my mother. And then narcissistic personality disorder is a personality disorder built around shame. And I have to compensate for that shame by either being fabulous at everything, or I'm going to just sort of feel like a piece of poo all the time and feel crappy. The ones that are fabulous don't ever come into therapy because the things are fabulous. And they also don't have a strong observing ego. And so I can imagine that both of those defense mechanisms of clinging tightly would just freak out in psychedelics, because you're basically dismantling their safety structure, the thing that keeps them safe.
One thing I wanted to add to what you were saying about NPD is narcissistic collapse and how dangerous that can be as well. depending on which medicine is being worked with, these medicines, again, dosage dependent, don't care about the psyche anymore. They're like, I'm going to show you the medicine, or the spirit of the medicine is going to show you what needs to be seen. And then sometimes people go into narcissistic collapse, and then you get suicidality, active suicidality, or what I've seen also passive suicidality, which is kind of behaving in ways that long-term will kill the body.
So then psychedelics are in vogue right now. We're talking about the grim realities of a mismatch of medicine, a psychic structure that is not geared for psychedelics. How can someone be a consumer of this? How do you know who to pick to work with? How do you keep yourself safe? How do you
You're asking me personally or in general?
However you want to take it. I don't think I'm knowledgeable enough to know whether I'm asking general. I mean, I'm not gifted in this topic, so I don't know.
So can you rephrase the question one more time and be a little bit more direct?
How does somebody keep themselves safe and know if they're meant to do this or not?
Okay, so how does someone as a seeker? So how does someone as a seeker determine whether or not they're right for this medicine to work?
Yeah.
It's a 10-hour answer, so I'm trying to You're like, where do I begin with this one? I had a therapist come to me once, and she asked me if I would train her. And I said, well, before you even mention the T word, we need to sit down and have a conversation, and I need to see how you are in medicine to even broach the subject. And I asked her, are you ready to have your paradigm of who you think you are and what the world is completely shattered and dismantled? And she said, no. I said, okay, well, there's your answer.
Yeah. I wonder what it was that made me feel finally ready to do it. I felt like, you know what? I had this weird experience. I kept feeling like medicine was calling me, like it was talking to me before I ever sought it out. And that's because I was not somebody turned on by this at all, ever. But then I started having dreams, like come to me. And I'm like, this is very weird. Like I didn't read Michael Pollan's book. I wasn't one of those people that got into you know what I mean? Like that, it just sort of called to me. I don't know if that's that was the answer for me. That's how
Well, you're lucky to be a regulated human being also.
I wish I were more.
But you're within range of normal.
Am I? This is
I imagine.
This is the best part of the interview. Someone just told me I'm in the range of normal. Oh God. You know what? It's interesting though. I do want to tie this into Sidewalk Talk a little bit more, because you said a couple of things that have really, made me, I'm repeating myself, but there is something that happens when I listen to another human in a really deep way, where I do also get to, and I choose to really take on their perspective and not hold on to my rigid beliefs about politics, about God, about the world, about the way things should be. And I really do listen. I don't get there all the time, but I'll have magical moments. And it always seems to happen sometimes in the therapy room too. But there's something about being in community doing this work and also being outside. The secret seems to be outside. That I will kind of take apart my default network. I won't have my identity structure. And it's not because I'm merging with the person, but there's just a kind of, the quality of the connection becomes psychedelic. I can't explain it. It definitely happens when I listen to self-described psychotics who were living on the streets. And I had quite magical experiences actually listening to those folks. It's awesome.
Well, there's so many points.
Now you're going to tell me I'm nuts.
Well, it's funny you mentioned psychotics. I mean, what I personally think is that most of us are living in a disconnected, distorted, psychopathic state in this default mode network. Again, Ram Dass was saying that, cultural context determines how we perceive things and what meaning we give those things. If someone were in India, for instance, and dancing and for 12 days straight, they wouldn't be thrown in a straitjacket. They'd be, they're connecting with the gods and they're in the state. Or if I'm talking to you about spirits and different layers of consciousness, and I connect with the spirit world and I'm talking from there, you may think I'm absolutely mental. Again, it's what context you're looking at me from that determines that meaning. And if we don't have a context or an understanding or appreciation, then we pathologize it.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me of this story on the sidewalk. Can I tell it to you?
Sure.
It was this woman. She kept, so we had like 10 listeners out that day, and there were 20 chairs. So we were really full, so there's 20 people in this long row on the sidewalk, and she kept walking down the middle of the chairs. And she was psychotic, whatever. And I said, I was the greeter, so my job is to keep the space safe. So I had to try to get her to stop doing that. And what I did is I said, hey, do you want to be listened to? I'll just stand here and listen to you. Mm-hmm. And she said, I want to walk with you. I said, great, let's walk. And I just really enjoyed her. I don't want to trivialize that some people have real mental illness. But there was something quite sentient about the things that she was saying, and fairy-like and magical, and she was also very funny. But she said this really interesting thing. She said, I can't remember what country it was. She make up some country. She said, I want to meet a man from Ireland with pink underwear. And I'm like, okay. And then we're standing there still talking, and this guy walks up to be listened to, and it turns out he was Irish. She and I are still talking. I said, let's just ask him. And so we asked him, do you have pink underwear on? And he got beet red. And I looked at her, and I looked at him, and he pulled out and he had pink underwear on. I know this is a crazy story, but it
or is it?
It was just this moment of what is real and not real, and who is the sane one here? Maybe she's just magical and we're all living in the Matrix, I just was like, it was awesome. I have weird experiences like that quite a lot on the sidewalk.
Yeah.
An Irishman with pink underwear. They
There
are out there.
If anyone's looking, that's their flavor.
God, I could talk to you for 2 more hours, but I know that we're at a stopping point here. Everyone that's listening, I'm going to put more information in the comments, but then also this will go live as a podcast interview, so there'll be show notes and any resources you want to send over, we can. Before we move to the final question, though, was there anything that you just felt like you wanted to say about psychedelics that you didn't get to? That felt that your spirit just says, I have to say this to this group of people?
What I would say is that these medicines are very sacred and they're very potent. And the medicines need to be carried by the medicine carriers in integrity. And I think that a lot of people are carrying these medicines, especially in Europe. I've seen it happen. It's happening in the States where people have the one psychedelic experience and they're like, oh, I need to now facilitate. To carry these medicines and to carry their wisdom is a huge responsibility, and people don't fully understand that.
Mm.
And so they take on this role or responsibility without fully comprehending the impact that they can have, and not in a good way.
Mm-hmm.
So I caution people who are interested in becoming a facilitator or going to the CIIS training or whatever. This is not a job. It's not a vocation. It's not a lifestyle. I wouldn't call it that. It's my life, and that I'm dedicated to this work.
Mm-hmm.
Every fiber of my being, every movement I make, everything that I do is dedicated to this.
Mm.
It's not something that you just do for the vogue of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's coming from people, from my perspective, and my advice as people who want to facilitate. And for the seekers or the patients, there's different entry points. There's the clinical model, and that's already fraught with a lot of issues. And that's just the ketamine, KAP, clinical, and it's fraught with a lot of issues. And I foresee a lot of problems rising up, and there being a lot of collateral damage when psilocybin and MDMA become available. But there are people that are going to be attracted to that, and that's maybe the only access that they may have. And some people get what they need to get and heal from what they need to heal from and go on with their lives. And there are people that should not be facilitating. Just because you've got a PhD or a LCSW means nothing.
Mm-hmm.
It's really ultimately being in hollow bone where there is no you as such. And those are the medicine carriers that carry these medicines, especially in the ceremony space where they're in hollow bone. There's no you as Dr. So-and-so or, Mike Johnson, LCSW. Those don't exist. So learning how to be in hollow bone, whether you're facilitating above ground or underground, and obviously being very, very careful who you work with, whether it's above ground or underground.
Cool. I appreciate that you add a level of seriousness. It's not quite the right word, but reverence or caution. Because I think when it becomes vogue, people can throw caution to the wind, and yeah. And I hear what you're saying about it's hard to figure out how to transfer this kind of what feels like indigenous wisdom in a Western model, which I hear you speaking to. But that's for a larger conversation, I think. Payam, I want to thank you for wrestling with a microphone to get here and letting me be me, like I tell people I'm a curious puppy dog and I get excited. I'm like, oh, but that, and so just, letting me kind of be curious about you and your work. And I also I'm grateful for my experience. I may be one of the spiritual bypassy ones. I don't know. It could be. I don't know.
We'll see soon.
There was
you
an
and
awful
me.
lot.
Just wait.
I don't know. I felt like I had no front. I felt like I had no front side of my body for 2 weeks afterwards. I'm like, oh God, this is not a nice way to walk around the planet. So now this is our ceremony, how we end this conversation on the Sidewalk Talk side, which is we invite you to offer a wish or words of wisdom to people who choose to sit on sidewalks and listen to people. Really, and they're global. They're all over the world. And you can speak. We had someone sing a song. I mean, I don't care what you say. It doesn't have to be clever. Just whatever comes. A wish or wisdom.
Yeah. 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 Hear with your heart. See with your ears. Taste with your nose. And smell with your mouth.
That's a good one. That's a good one. So I didn't know if there was you mentioned that you wanted to send us off in a prayer?
That was my prayer.
Great. I thought it was.
That
It
was
felt
my
like it
prayer.
was.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Here with a heart. I think one of the, to explain this, to have a little bit of context, is we're accustomed to seeing with the eyes and hearing with the ears, but once we actually start to hear from the heart, see with the or hear with the eyes, that changes our perspective and challenges our mind and then allows us to see differently and feel differently and be differently. It's a huge challenge, and invite people who are in the business of listening to listen differently.
Well, it's a huge opportunity to plug that we lead a listener training called HEAR, which stands for heart-centered listening. That's what we try to teach, is how to listen from your heart, not your ears. So I thought that was very funny. It's really lovely. We teach about the nervous system, and we use IFS. We teach parts of self, so it's cool. All right. It was so lovely to spend some time with you. It was a highlight of my day so far, so thank you so much.
Same here.
And to be continued. For those of you that are listening, there's a recording of this on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook, and there will be a podcast interview. Payam's website is payam.com. It's quite easy. And to be continued.
See you in Germany.
Yeah.